Okay. Thanks again for taking the time to come to our session today. We thought it would be useful to have a discussion around federal funders' policies, given the Nelson memo from a couple of years ago, and to look at what their impact might be on scholarly communications. Certainly we've seen similar mandates being put in place in other parts of the world, but as a fairly significant change to US federal policy in terms of the change from the Holdren memo to the Nelson memo, we thought that it would be useful to gather together a panel of people from various different stakeholders in order to discuss their take on the changes that are included. So we're joined today by representatives of libraries, publishers, as well as research funders. I will let each of them introduce themselves. So if we could start off with Ashley.
Hello, thank you, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join remotely. So happy to be included. I'm Ashley Farley, Senior Officer of Knowledge Research Services at the Gates Foundation, and I've been at the Foundation for a decade now, leading our open access policy and associated initiatives. I'm a librarian by background, so that's often the perspective I bring to this work. Thank you.
And Judith?
My name is Judith Carano, and I'm the head of the chemistry library at the University of Pennsylvania. In this capacity, I do two things. I work with our research chemists in all areas of their research, which goes from the beginning to publication. And I also train their students in information retrieval, information literacy. I teach them about the publishing process, and I've started introducing responsible conduct of research and data management.
And then finally, for our publisher representative, Scott from the Association of Computing Machinery.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Delman. I'm the Director of Publications for the Association for Computing Machinery, otherwise known as the ACM. Let me state just a couple of words about the organization. ACM is a global scientific and educational organization dedicated to advancing the art, science, engineering, and application of computing, serving both professional and public interest by fostering the open exchange of information and by promoting the highest professional and ethical standards. A few words about us as a publisher. We're a leading computer science publisher. We publish approximately 40,000 research articles per year and serve approximately 80 to 100,000 authors annually. And this number is increasing dramatically every year. These authors are based in over 100 countries around the world, with approximately 25% of these authors based at US research institutions, to just put that in perspective.
Thank you. And to introduce myself, I'm Chris Pym from ACS Publications. I work in our funder relations group, and so it's my job to try and understand what researchers want from publishers and how we can navigate the very different requirements from different parts of the world around that. So you'll be glad to hear that today is not going to be death by PowerPoint. We have a very small number of slides just to set the scene, and then the idea is that this is more of a conversation. We'll start off with some prepared questions that we've spoken about previously before moving on to open it up to the floor as well to let you share your insights and any questions or concerns that you may have. So just to set the scene, as it were. As I'm sure everyone here is aware, the new public access policy, including its requirements around zero embargo access towards author-accepted manuscripts, as well as the underlying research data around that, are due to come into effect by December the 31st of this year. There are lots of other funders in the world that have comparable policies. For the sake of today, we'll sort of lump together open access and public access where appropriate. The only difference really being the requirement of many European funders around liberal licensing that is not included in the Nelson memo. And we'll also, I think, try and address some of the issues that I think we're all aware of, where despite the relatively long lead time that we've had around this, awareness amongst authors does seem to be very low around these changes that are coming down the line, or in many cases, including the NIH, have already taken effect. So where are we now? August 2022, under the Biden OSTP, the Nelson memo was published that laid out the requirements. By the end of last year, all federal funders, that includes those that wouldn't have been included under the Holdren memo because they were granting less than $100 million a year, are now included, and they had to make their public access policies publicly available. And we'd anticipated, I think this is true for many libraries, publishers, and others, and researchers, where they were aware that most of these changes would look to take effect from December the 31st this year. Then at the end of April, there was a notice published by NIH bringing forward the effective date and the implementation date of their policy to the start of July, which I think caught a lot of people on the hop, as it were, which has led us to where we are now, where we see numerous funders that have their policies active, certainly Department of Energy, NIH, NSF have active policies at this point, with the others to follow presumably by the end of the year. So that's it for the slides. All you'll see from now onwards is the open question slide on screen, and I won't bore you anymore with PowerPoint. But I think probably the first question that we can discuss as a group is, what are funders trying to achieve with this? And just to suggest a couple of things, is this part of the current administration's gold standard science approach? Is this related to trying to make available large corpuses of data for artificial intelligence to train AI on? Or is this perhaps an attempt to try and drive forward a global transition towards open access? So I think because we have a research funder virtually in the room, perhaps we can invite Ashley to share her thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you. I'll give the perspective from the Gates Foundation. I think it'd be much longer discussion if we try to ascertain what the current agency's goals are. I think there are, many, and maybe we don't touch on any of them at all. But from the foundation's perspective, it's really about extending impact and speed of the problems we're trying to solve. So, we fund, I sit in global health, we fund a lot in global health, global development, agriculture. So we have, specific divisions with strategies that have a very specific goal, often very lofty. I think we've stepped away from that a bit, but historically we've had, like eradicate malaria by 2025. Well, we didn't achieve that, but we made progress. And I think the idea of making sure that the research we fund, that the outputs are openly and broadly available, is that others can build upon that quickly. We saw a lot of great examples, and it achieved things that we've been talking about for many years during the pandemic. We've kind of seen a recession back from that because we don't have strong, I think, open science or open research policies, and the culture hasn't fully changed to embrace those. So we've kind of gone back to pre-COVID times, especially around, I think, data and more open research. In fact, we've also seen some going back and even open access, which is interesting to see. But the goal is really to make sure those outputs are broadly and widely available to build upon. I do think there's also a moral motivation behind it as well, that everyone should have equal access. There shouldn't be a privilege to accessing information. That ties in with our broader mission at the Gates Foundation of, all lives have equal value, and to lead a healthy, productive life. So I think that, but I do think you make a really good point, and this is probably going to become more and more prominent as research funders fund and really dig into, like, the foundation's very invested in AI right now, very interested in it, and on the teams that I've been consulting on this, they have kind of little awareness of what copyright means now, what CC licenses mean, like how can we leverage certain tools, and so advising on that, I can see that definitely having an impact on it as well. Thanks.
Judith, you look like you'd like to comment.
Yeah, I think we've been moving in this direction for quite some time. The open access requirements are nothing new. The new thing is that the version of record or the last author manuscript needs to be immediately open access. And part of that in the US is because my tax dollars funded this, I should be able to see it. With the open data, I think that has its roots both in reusing information, a better return on investment for the funder. But also there's an aspect of transparency there and combating fraud. And if I can see the primary data on which the study is built, then I can trust that study a little bit more. So these are not new. What's new is the immediacy of the access. And I think that's what's sort of thrown us all for a loop.
Yeah. Any thoughts from your side?
I can't really speak as a research funder. As a society publisher, I would say the cynic in me would say that it's about ROI. If you're a public funder and you're giving a research scientist a grant, you want to know what that research is. You want it to be publicly accessible. You want to maximize the return that you're getting on that research. And I think it's pretty clear that if that content is out there openly, and both the version of record and other versions as well as the data, you have the greatest chance of getting more impact. And so in the field that I work in computing, a large percentage and an increasing percentage of what we publish is in AI and machine learning and those areas. And we see, obviously, a lot of the research funding is going in that direction. So it's about accelerating innovation, accelerating the impact that you get from the invested dollars.
Yeah, and that would tally very much with what the ambitions of groups like Coalition S have been historically. So yeah, perhaps just an extension of that into the US, which historically has been perhaps not quite as OA active as Europe in some regards. But it does lead on to another question, and I think data plays into this slightly, and we'll come back to data as a topic more, but obviously there are substantial costs for sharing data publicly. Thinking that as one of the larger general purpose repositories at the moment, lots of research is shared through Zenodo, but we can't necessarily rely on CERN's generosity forever. So in terms of both public access for manuscripts, but also for data, do we know who is going to pay for public access? And I'm going to go to a librarian first, because I'm sure as a librarian you have thoughts.
I actually do not know the answer to this question. I think that it's going to end up being hybrid funded. Funders are going to, well, one would hope, researchers will be able to use dollars from their grants and from their funding to help pay to store these data. Libraries are definitely going to have to pay because we always have to pay. We support our researchers, we support what they're doing, and we have an interest in having this data available so that others can use it. And if it's openly available, then we don't have to pay for it on the other end. I think the researchers are going to have to contribute something. I don't think it's going to be cost neutral to them. Some will come out of their grants, some will have to come out of their institutional coffers. And I think who pays depends on where it lives.
Yeah.
Are we talking about institutional repositories, which creates a lot of silos? My personal preference is for domain data repositories, but then someone has to build it. And is there some kind of a cost associated with using it? Not if it's open. Is there a contribution cost? So I think this is an area that's evolving.
Yeah, I'd agree. And certainly, as some people may know, we at ACS launched last year a general purpose chemistry repository called Chemistry Data Bank. And so I think that there is scope for discipline-specific generalist repositories, as well as where we already have very sub-discipline specific repositories, like within chemistry, for instance, we have crystallography repositories, and in genetics, then we have GenBank and all of the other NIH-sponsored repositories. Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, so All of those stakeholders certainly are going to have to pay for it. I would say it's important to distinguish between the cost of conducting the research, which is oftentimes what most people think about the research grant going towards, and the costs of actually disseminating that research. And whether we're talking about the paper or we're talking about the data behind the paper, the artifacts, I think there are going to be different groups and different stakeholders that pay for those two things. But you've got to acknowledge what those costs are. You've got to be transparent about what those costs are. It's troubling to me that I see a shift away from covering the cost of publication with some funders, and that does concern me, because those are, as a society, a nonprofit society, there are real costs. We're really transparent about what those costs are so people can see. Not every publisher is, but absolutely, without a doubt, this is an industry that has invested heavily in infrastructure to disseminate content. What I haven't seen as much about in recent years is the data and the artifacts. I think the infrastructure is not as far advanced with data and repositories. I mean, you'll see some public-private partnerships to do that, but that makes me a little bit more worried than sort of the costs of dissemination, whether we're talking subscription models or open access models on the content side. How are we going to effectively sort of disseminate that in a sustainable way, the artifacts of publication, research?
We will inevitably come back to the sustainability word, but Judith, it looked like you had a comment.
Yeah, I think the reason that we're not seeing this is that articles are very flat, and they're all the same. Data are not. There are as many types of data as there are types of researcher. Each one comes with its associated metadata. Trying to build repositories that handle this is extremely difficult and extremely costly. And so I think we've been sort of pushing this ball down the road, and eventually we're not going to be able to push it any further.
Yeah, and I think that again, is very apposite and appropriate comment regarding where we are with data, and it's not just something that is unique to the United States. It's something that we see across Europe and the rest of the world as well, where there are data mandates in place, and yet there isn't really perhaps the infrastructure that we would like. Also within researchers, once you move outside of the physical and life sciences, lots of people wouldn't even necessarily recognize that they have data. My favorite example of an open data repository is actually the Barnes collection in Philadelphia, where they have high-resolution scans of all of the artwork available to the public through their website, which I think is a really nice way of indicating towards art historians and the like that actually this is your data, this is what you are working from. And so there are mechanisms that we can put in place, but in many cases, you're right, I don't think that they are there now. Ashley.
Yes, yeah. I think it's great to hear that. I think there's a lot of alignment here. I personally think that research dissemination should be considered part of the research process itself. Like, I would even argue it might be the most important. I do think that we should be trending away from relying on like the paper article format as a container of the information is not serving its purpose as much anymore and is costing us a lot. So I would like to see us spend less on the kind of publishing papers and more on the data and the data curation, because I think that's definitely where we're headed. It's what's most valuable, like especially when I'm working with program staff in the foundation. They want access to the data. Waiting for papers, even sometimes in preprint form, is too late to really make informed decisions on the work that they're doing. So they want to try to get the data inside the foundation to use it as quickly as possible, and then open it up as much as possible more broadly. As far as who pays, yeah, I don't think there's a great answer. I do think it'll be a mixed model. My vision is I would love for research funders and government institutions to fund the infrastructure. And then I could see like libraries and institution budgets covering kind of the services that make the day-to-day go. But I would like to be able to, fund infrastructure that any researcher anywhere can use throughout the world. And I think that matches research funders' goals overall really well. Instead of like when we covered APCs, we were really benefiting grantees that already are pretty privileged to have access to a lot of things in this space. And I want to use our funding to broaden that to anyone.
Thank you. So moving away from the who pays for it, data, as we've already touched upon, presents some fairly huge challenges just around infrastructure, what data are for different researchers. What do you think can be done to assist with that? I mean, we see mandating data management plans. We see some institutions around the world putting in place members of staff who are data specialists, and certainly in the Netherlands and the UK to a lesser degree, we're starting to see data stewards embedded within individual faculty as a way of helping researchers understand what their own community norms are, because of course if you can't find the data, then there's no point doing it. It just becomes a box-ticking exercise. So any thoughts from the panel around what needs to be done around open data more widely?
So I'll be a little provocative here. I believe that within 10 years, the paper itself is going to be significantly less relevant and heavily used than it is today. The concept of a research paper, writing up the research, and the data will be the only thing that people are primarily concerned with. Now, I've been doing scientific publishing for 33 years, and every 5 to 10 years, something comes along, and people will say to you, publishers will be out of business, there will be no need for this, scientists can publish it themselves, libraries can publish it themselves. And I've never believed any of that, but I do believe that the direction and pace of innovation with AI and the way things are moving now, and we see it already in our submission data. We went from 30,000 articles accepted in 2023 to 38,000 articles accepted in 2024, and we believe very strongly that the main reason for that is because it's easier for an author to use these technologies to assist them in writing their papers. Now, are they pumping their data into an LLM and out comes the paper, and then they just send it off to the publisher? In some cases, yes, and I think depending upon which publisher you are and how rigorous your peer review is, that either gets caught or not caught. But I do think that at some point, the idea of writing a paper is going to become a commodity, and what's going to be relevant is the data. Having that data publicly accessible is critical to knowing whether or not the research that was conducted is real, especially in a time where we're sort of under attack with fraudulent data, fraudulent papers. So doesn't answer your question specifically, but I do think that that's a future that is coming, and we should be preparing for that with as much infrastructure as we can.
So as you started that by saying you were going to be provocative, I will pose another side question associated with that. In that world where data has primacy, how do we square that with the much talked about decrease in public trust in science? Is that something that we should be considering? And Judith?
So I have to disagree with you because you made me disagree with you. There are papers that in some fields that are data papers, where basically the researcher describes how they took their data set, but the real product is the data set. But many papers are not just presenting a data set, they're explaining the data set. Now you can throw whatever data set in front of whatever people you want. If they don't understand this, they're going to need some guidance through it. And that's where the public trust in science comes in. We need people who are still able to tell a good story, who are able to engage a reader and make them understand their data. Their data are there as supporting actors in that case. I have looked at this. You can also look at this, and I'm presenting it to you so you can trust me. But listen to my story and benefit from my expertise. So I think that the explanation and the data are both required, especially for the trust. That does not mean the paper has to look like what it does today, and I think there should be a change in the way science is reported. But the scientist still needs to be able to display their curiosity, their creativity, and their insights.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that the paper is going to go away completely. I think that the notion that, that the author is spending a significant amount of their time generating paper after paper, explaining their research, I think that is already shifting. We already see a significant number of authors using LLMs to generate their papers. And then it's a question of how you interact with the LLM to be able to express that creativity and express your research.
And
I
Ashley,
think yeah, I was going to say, especially if we are talking about, public trust in science, that to me does not look anything like kind of what works for the academic world. Like, we would want to see this information being shared, in places where the public are, which is more social media, more videos, different format, different content than we see now. I was really excited 2 weeks ago for International Open Access Week. We launched a social media campaign and got some fairly well-known influencers in science talk about open access itself, and it was so fascinating to see them kind of take that topic on. That's why I think we'll find and need to build trust with the general public.
yeah, I agree, and I think one of the better examples at the moment of a publisher that's working to try and enhance public trust in science would be the Cochrane collaboration with their plain language summaries of articles, which I think are a great idea, and certainly particularly in, obviously, medical sciences being directly impacting on people's lives. I think there's a very strong argument for that to be seen more of.
Can I add one element to that? I don't know if everyone's familiar with the decision that Archive, which is kind of the original preprint service, came out, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and announced that they are no longer going to be receiving review articles because they've been inundated with thousands and thousands of review articles that are just generated. It's complete slop. It's generated by LLMs, and it's essentially bogging down their kind of light moderation process. Yeah. And I think that is giving us a glimpse into the future of what we're going to see. We're already seeing it at the publisher level, and that it's the data that we need to focus on. And if I'm a scientific publisher, if I'm a funder, I want to make sure that the data is reproducible. So efforts to ensure reproducibility, if there are going to be mandates to make sure that that data is not just available and accessible, but that there's actually a peer review process in place, that there is a process in place to replicate, reproduce that data. And I just don't see enough of that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, again, an incredibly fair comment, particularly in a time where we have ever-growing concerns and commentary at conferences like this and publisher conferences around issues around research integrity and the rise of AI.
Can I say something? I think that's a great point to bring up, and it was something that I heard in a convening I was at recently that I think should become central to the discussion is what is motivating people to do that, or machines or things. And so we discussed what are some of those elements, which is, I think, fascinating. And, if we continue to really live in a publish or perish paradigm, then yeah, that's going to continue to be a problem. And maybe we should focus on getting rid of whatever incentive is driving paper mills and things to really just churn out this kind of stuff, because there's got to be some sort of benefit or reward there. I mean, mainly probably financial in some aspects, but then definitely in an incentive structure system. Yeah,
and I think just to speak to that for a moment, it's pleasing to see groups like Coara starting to try and refocus the way that rewards and recognition are evaluated by funders, by institutions, and so on. Because we've been talking about sort of integrity, to move on slightly tangentially, with any mandate, it's potentially only as strong as its enforcement. And we know that there are a number of federal funders that participate in Chorus and other initiatives, and increasingly we see at institutional level projects like OA Switchboard that potentially can be used as a compliance checking tool in some ways. But how do we think that compliance is going to be checked? Because certainly in the United Kingdom, under the block grant process that UKRI operate, compliance checking sat with the institution to check their author's homework, effectively. How do we think that this might work in the public access realm? Anyone want to?
I'm happy to jump in. So I'd completely agree that really what makes a policy effective and come alive is compliance. Personally, I like to try to take as much as an educational approach as possible. We want researchers to embrace open access, and having policies with strong sanctions is often can either turn it into that checkbox exercise or create a lot of friction and irritation in complying with the policy. We work with OA Works, which is a nonprofit that we've been working with to monitor our compliance, and then we have a process where we follow up with authors to encourage them or ask them to become compliant and make it as easy as possible, because it's kind of a drag and drop to either have a copy in Zenodo or PubMed Central. We now have a copy in PubMed Central. I think from the federal agencies, they have very robust reporting, and I think the structure already in place to achieve this. I mean, I'm not extremely familiar with it, but I think even if you don't get your, there's follow-up, there's enforcement. I think what will be interesting to see is the route that they take to achieve that open access, because of course, if you pay for the version record to be fully open access, that's done and easy. But if it's going to be sharing an AAM and that's at conflict with the journal policies, this is where we ran into issues with rights retention of we can't take on, we can't give legal advice to our grantees. We connect them with their institutions, but nobody wants to start a legal battle over, am I breaking a grant agreement? Am I breaking a copyright transfer agreement? What's the policies? What's allowable? It can get really, really messy quickly there. And there's honestly at this point no answer in untangling that. And that's one of the major reasons that we moved towards preprints, to kind of make that aspect easier. But yeah, I think the federal agencies are really good at tracking and compliance. It's probably not cheap.
Scott?
So about 5.5 years ago, my organization took the decision that it was going to set a 5-year timeline for complete transition to 100% open access. That was done for a variety of reasons. Compliance, future compliance with federal funders in the US, but in the UK, in Europe, elsewhere around the world, where we were seeing a lot of the same characteristics of those mandates. So they were all saying authors have to retain copyright, CC BY licensing, open accessibility of the version of record or the accepted manuscript. There was sort of the list of things is pretty consistent regardless of what country you're based in. We took the decision, it was an all or nothing decision, that within 5 years, if we could make it financially sustainable, we would become a 100% open access publisher, specifically because we didn't want our authors to have to wonder whether or not the publication they're submitting to is going to be compliant, whether their paper is going to be compliant with whatever their funder mandate is. And so one of the things we'll be able to say next year is if you publish with us, you don't have to worry about compliance. We're ticking all the boxes for you. You just have to make sure that you send us your paper. I wish that other publishers would do that. I think one of the biggest barriers to this transition to public access or open access, whatever you want to call it, is that that not enough societies and publishers have been willing to commit to a date and then do what they have to do to make it financially viable for them. And I think unless you do that, this drags on for years and years.
Yeah, and I take that point, but I look at the Royal Society of Chemistry's announcement that they would flip by 2028, that they've been unable to. So I think that there is a degree of disciplinary difference there, where, within biomedicine, I would assume that it's considerably easier than it would be in, something that doesn't, a humanities subject, for instance, that just doesn't have the same open culture at the moment.
I think there are 6 words that say why or how compliance is going to happen. Future funding is contingent upon compliance. And that's really what it's going to come down to for the researcher. And I'm thinking more about open data than open access, but already they have to write reports to their funding agency. The report has to indicate how they've complied. The grant could be rescinded if they have not done their part. Future grants will not be given if they don't do their part. So I think there are definite funding agency teeth, even where there isn't a culture necessarily of openness or where this wouldn't be an individual's priority. Who will check? Obviously, the funders will be checking unless they delegate that task to somebody else.
Yeah.
So there's a carrot and a stick here, and I completely 100% agree. Until funders around the world say, no more money unless you comply with these things, if that were to happen, I think things would move very quickly in the right direction. I think there's also a carrot with public access or open access that we don't talk as much about now as we used to talk about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, which is that content that's open, if you're an author, if you're a research scientist, you're doing it because you want to get your work out there. You want to make the world a better place. You want to innovate. You want to solve problems. And content that's open has a better chance of doing that.
Yeah.
And so I think the data that supports that can show your authors, can show your researchers that if you publish on an open access basis, it's going to be better marketing for you. You're going to get more downloads. You're going to get more citations. I mean, the data's there,
Yeah.
but we just don't put it out there enough.
Judith?
However, if you are paying to publish open access, does it feel nice when Merck is making however much money they are making? So I think there's a side of that coin. Yeah, sure, you'll get lots of citations, but there's a group of individuals who are also invested in this and have made contributions to this process and are now not being included in this conversation because this is not a priority for them. And so I think we need to get industry back to the table in certain disciplines and see how they can help.
And I think that comes back to one of the conversations that was had at ACS Fall this year around how does that work with citation in AI, and should AI be allowed to be used for corporate purposes when they're not contributing towards the actual research that's underpinning their commercialization, potentially. So we had one final question around sustainability, but I'm going to assume that none of us have an answer to how does this all work sustainably for everyone? And I'll take the opportunity while we have a few minutes left to go to general questions from the audience. So if anyone's got a question or a comment, then please come forward, speak into one of the microphones, and the panel will see what they can do to help.